The bright lights of the awards ceremony reflected off the golden trophies, casting a dazzling glow over the grand stage. The audience erupted into cheers as the night's biggest rising star, Bella White, stepped forward to receive the coveted Best New Actress award. Her delicate features, framed by soft curls, shone with an innocent glow under the camera flashes. But in that moment, the real storm wasn't on stage. It was in the crowd. Ethan Carter, Hollywood's most sought-after leading man, ignored the stunned whispers and cameras, rushing toward Bella like a devoted lover finally reunited with his long-lost soulmate. He wrapped his arms around her, whispering something in her ear, his smile wide and filled with something dangerously close to love. The entire internet exploded. The perfect husband of the entertainment industry had just trampled over his own marital vows for the world to see. At home, I sat motionless, my fingers clenched around the edge of the leather sofa. My entire body felt cold, yet my chest burned with an unbearable heat. The TV screen replayed the moment over and over again, cutting to Bella's demure smile, Ethan's protective stance, and the speculation-filled expressions of the audience. The woman he was embracing so openly, the one who had just received a standing ovation, was the very person who had destroyed my marriage. The buzz of my phone pulled me back to reality. A message popped up from Ethan. "Sophia, we need to talk." For the first time in my life, I wasn't anxious to see him. I wasn't desperate to hear an explanation. Because I knew exactly what was coming. Ethan arrived home late that night, his steps cautious as he entered the living room. Bella followed closely behind, draped in his suit jacket, looking like the picture of fragile beauty. Her eyes were red, her lips trembling, as if she were on the verge of tears. I knew this act all too well. "I'm sorry, Sophia," Ethan began, running a hand through his dark hair. "I never wanted you to find out this way." I remained silent, watching him like a hunter observing prey. He took a deep breath. "The rumors are getting out of control. Bella is being painted as a homewrecker, and the media is tearing us apart. Us. As if we were a unit. As her protector, I need to do something to fix this. And there's only one way," he continued, hesitating before placing a folder on the coffee table. "We need to get a divorce." Silence stretched between us. The clock on the wall ticked, its sound unnervingly loud. Bella sniffled dramatically. "Sophia, I know this is hard for you. But please, the world is so cruel to me right now. People think I stole your husband. I can't take it anymore." She attempted to kneel before me, but Ethan grabbed her arm, stopping her. "Don't do this, Bella," he murmured, his voice gentle. I felt something inside me snap. The past rushed back like a nightmare I had tried so hard to forget. In my previous life, I had fought tooth and nail, screaming, crying, and refusing to let go. I had loved Ethan with everything I had, only to be thrown aside like an unwanted burden. I had wasted years trying to win a fight I was never meant to win. And what had it given me? A slow and painful death, a body ravaged by disease, and a soul crushed beyond recognition. But this time, I wasn't the same woman. This time, I had been given a second chance. With deliberate slowness, I reached forward, picked up the divorce papers, and pulled the pen from the folder. The weight of the document in my hands felt lighter than I had expected. Then, without a moment of hesitation, I signed my name. Ethan's expression flickered, his confident smirk faltering. He had expected a fight. He had expected begging, tears, and resistance. Not this. "What's the catch?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. I leaned back, meeting his gaze with an icy calm. "Nothing," I said smoothly. "Let's separate for now. Once the scandal dies down, we can go our own ways." Bella's lips parted slightly, her eyes widening with something close to disbelief. Wasn't this what she wanted? So why did she look so shaken? Ethan hesitated, his fingers tightening around the document. "We should go to the Civil Affairs office tomorrow to finalize it." "All right." Just like that, I had let go. Bella turned toward Ethan with a triumphant smirk, but I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. Something about this didn't sit right with her. As Ethan and Bella left, my phone buzzed again. Another message from him. I'm sorry, Sophia. Once this is over, we can start again. Start again? I let out a bitter laugh, but before I realized it, silent tears slipped down my face. I had spent years blinded by love, holding on to a man who had let me slip through his fingers. This time, I would not make the same mistake. This time, I was walking away from the fight. And when I returned, I would be stronger than ever. The next morning, the sun filtered through my bedroom window, its warmth an ironic contrast to the cold resolve in my heart. Today was the day I would finalize my divorce. The thought should have filled me with sorrow, but instead, I felt nothing. Not grief, not regret, just an eerie sense of clarity. The city was still waking up when I arrived at the Civil Affairs office. Ethan was already there, waiting for me with his hands in his pockets. He looked polished, as always, tall, handsome, and effortlessly charismatic. A man adored by millions. A man who had once been my entire world. Not anymore. Morning, he greeted, his voice smooth but lacking its usual warmth. I nodded. Morning. Bella wasn't with him this time, which surprised me. It was unlike her to miss the opportunity to flaunt her victory. Perhaps she thought the battle was already won. We stepped inside, the official process moving along efficiently. Signatures, stamps, a few words exchanged with the clerk, it was all a blur. And then, just like that, we were no longer husband and wife. Ethan held the divorce certificate in his hands for a long moment, staring at it as though it were an artifact from another life. He let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. I never thought it would end like this. I watched him carefully, waiting for the words I knew were coming. Sophia, this doesn't have to be forever, he said finally, lifting his gaze to mine. We just need time apart. When things settle, we can talk. I should have been angry at his arrogance. I should have been furious that even now, he thought I was still his to claim whenever he wished. But all I felt was pity. I don't think you understand, I said softly, folding my copy of the certificate and tucking it into my purse. I'm not waiting for you. A flicker of something, panic, crossed his face, but he quickly masked it. Sophia, I'm leaving the city, I interrupted, my voice unwavering. Going back to Jackson City. The shock on his face was evident. He took a step forward. That's home for you, but you haven't been back in years. Your life is here now. My life was with you, I corrected him. And you threw it away. Ethan clenched his jaw, but he had nothing to say to that. I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, I glanced back one last time. Goodbye, Ethan. I didn't wait for his response. I walked out of the Civil Affairs office, feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight of a love that had long since turned into chains was finally gone. The flight to Jackson City was uneventful, but my mind was far from calm. Memories of my past life flooded in, each one a painful reminder of what I had lost before. My father had tried to save me back then, begging me to leave Ethan before it was too late. I had ignored him, and he had suffered for my mistakes. This time, I would make things right. When I stepped off the plane, James Hale was waiting for me. James had always been there, even when I had been too blinded by love to see it. He had built his career from the ground up, rising through the ranks of the entertainment industry with talent and perseverance. He had been my friend, my confidant. And now, he was one of the few people I could trust. Sophia. His deep voice was steady, reassuring. He took my suitcase effortlessly, falling into step beside me. Welcome home. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to smile. Maybe this was the start of something new. Something better. The drive through Jackson City was strangely calming. The roads were familiar, yet it felt like I was seeing everything for the first time. It had been years since I had last set foot here, yet the nostalgia hit me harder than I expected. The skyline stretched above, the city humming with life. Unlike the artificial glamour of the capital, Jackson City held a rawness, an authenticity that made my chest tighten with long-buried emotions. James drove in comfortable silence, his eyes flickering toward me every so often as if assessing my mood. He had always been like that, quiet but observant. Back when I had first met him, he had been just another struggling actor, battling scandals that threatened to end his career before it even began. And now? Now, he was a rising star, someone who had managed to carve a name for himself without the need for cheap tricks or controversy. "How does it feel to be back?" James finally asked, his voice deep and steady. I turned to him, letting out a slow breath. "Strange. Like I've been sleepwalking for years, and I'm only just waking up." James nodded, understanding in his gaze. "You needed to go through it. Now you're here, and that's what matters." I offered him a small smile. "Thanks, James. For everything." He shook his head, keeping his eyes on the road. "You don't have to thank me, Sophia. I'm just glad you're finally putting yourself first." The weight of his words settled in my chest. Putting myself first. I had never known how to do that. My entire life had been about Ethan, about loving him, supporting him, waiting for him. Even when I had been hurt, even when I had been humiliated, I had clung to him like he was the only thing keeping me alive. But I wasn't that woman anymore. When we arrived at my family's estate, I hesitated at the doorstep. The house was grand, an elegant mix of modern design and timeless architecture. My father had built this place from the ground up, a testament to his hard work and resilience. Yet, as beautiful as it was, it had become a place of sorrow. I had disappointed him. Repeatedly. James must have sensed my hesitation because he gently touched my arm. "They'll be happy to see you, Sophia." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. With a deep breath, I stepped inside. The scent of home enveloped me instantly. Freshly brewed tea, the faint aroma of my mother's favorite candles, it was all the same. And then, before I could take another step, I heard the sound of hurried footsteps. My mother appeared first. Her eyes widened in shock before they glistened with unshed tears. "Sophia." I barely had time to react before she wrapped me in a tight embrace. Her arms trembled around me, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. She pulled away, cupping my face with warm hands. "You're really here." My father entered next, his usually stoic expression softening as he took me in. He wasn't a man of many words, but in his eyes, I saw everything he wanted to say. "Welcome home, Sophia," he said quietly. A part of me wanted to cry, but I held it together. Instead, I smiled. "It's good to be home." The first few days passed in a blur. My mother fussed over me constantly, making sure I was eating well, sleeping enough. My father watched from a distance, his way of showing care without smothering me. And James? James stayed close but never overstepped. He understood I needed space to process everything. It wasn't until a week later that the outside world came knocking again. A news article surfaced online, Ethan Carter and Bella White spotted together, a new beginning? I stared at the headline, my stomach twisting. It wasn't the article itself that hurt me, I had expected this. But the picture attached sent a wave of something bitter through my veins. Ethan, standing in the penthouse we had once shared, holding Bella's hand. The same penthouse where I had played the piano, where I had laughed, cried, begged for his attention. And now, Bella stood in my place, her face painted with triumph. I clenched my fists. I had thought I had let go. I had thought I had moved on. But the sting of betrayal still lingered, reminding me of the scars Ethan had left behind. James must have noticed my change in demeanor because he appeared beside me, glancing at the screen. He didn't say anything, but his expression darkened. Do you regret it? He asked after a moment. I let out a humorless laugh. No. But I hate that it still affects me. James exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. You spent years loving him, Sophia. It's natural to feel something. But that doesn't mean you should let it control you. I turned to him, my chest tight. Then how do I stop? How do I erase it all? He was quiet for a moment before he spoke. You don't erase it. You replace it. I frowned. Replace it with what? James met my gaze, something unreadable in his eyes. With something real. With something that won't break you. The air between us grew heavy, charged with something neither of us was ready to address. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but before I could, my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Sophia, can we talk? I stared at the words, my heart pounding. James glanced at the screen and scoffed. Typical. He lets you go and then realizes what he's lost. I bit my lip. Should I answer? James shook his head. No. But I know you will. He was right. No matter how much I wanted to pretend I had moved on, a part of me still craved closure. I needed to hear him say it, to hear him admit that he had never truly valued me until it was too late. Taking a deep breath, I typed my response. I have nothing to say to you. Then, without waiting for a reply, I blocked his number. James smiled, a slow, approving curve of his lips. Good. That's a start. I turned to him, my pulse still racing. What now? He reached for his car keys, tossing them into the air before catching them effortlessly. Now, we start over. On your terms. For the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. The days in Jackson City felt lighter, as if the weight I had carried for years had finally begun to lift. My mornings started with fresh air and the familiar aroma of home-cooked meals, prepared by my mother. The evenings were filled with quiet conversations, ones that reminded me of what I had lost in my previous life, family, stability, and love that wasn't conditional. But even in this peace, the ghosts of my past refused to rest. News of Ethan and Bella's relationship continued to spread like wildfire. Every headline, every picture, and every interview was a fresh wound trying to reopen. The media adored their story, a man repaying a debt of honor by giving everything to the woman who had lost her fiancé. I wondered if the world would still find it so romantic if they knew the full truth. I kept my distance from the chaos, refusing to let it consume me again. But one evening, while I was helping my mother in the kitchen, James walked in, his expression grim. Ethan is here, he said. The words sent a jolt through my system, but I forced myself to remain composed. My mother's hands stilled on the rolling pin, her gaze snapping to me. Do you want me to send him away? She asked, her voice tight with concern. I shook my head. No. I'll handle this. James clenched his jaw. Sophia, you don't owe him anything. You know that, right? I did. But I also knew that running away wouldn't change anything. If I was going to close this chapter for good, I had to face it head on. Ethan stood outside, his posture stiff, his usually confident demeanor slightly rattled. It had been weeks since I last saw him, and yet it felt like a lifetime. He looked the same, yet somehow different. There was something hollow in his eyes, something uncertain. Sophia, he started as soon as I stepped outside. I needed to see you. I crossed my arms, keeping my expression neutral. Why? He exhaled, raking a hand through his hair. Because I can't stop thinking about you. About us. I let out a small laugh, though there was no humor in it. Us? There is no us, Ethan. You made sure of that. His jaw tightened. I never wanted this. I thought I was doing the right thing. The right thing for who? I countered. For you? For Bella? Because it certainly wasn't for me. He flinched, but I didn't stop. You threw me aside like I meant nothing. You made me the villain so you could play the hero. And now that you've gotten everything you wanted, you're standing here, telling me you can't stop thinking about me? He swallowed hard. I know I was wrong, Sophia. But I cut him off, my voice firm. You don't get to do this. You don't get to come back now that you've lost the illusion you built for yourself. I spent years waiting for you to see me, to choose me, but you never did. His face twisted with regret. I thought you'd fight for us, he admitted quietly. I thought you'd refuse the divorce. I felt a sharp pang in my chest, but I pushed past it. And that's exactly the problem, Ethan. You expected me to fight for something you had already given up on. You expected me to keep proving my worth when I should have never had to in the first place. For a long moment, he said nothing. The weight of my words settled between us, heavy and irreversible. Finally, he sighed. I miss you, Sophia. I shook my head, a sad smile forming on my lips. You don't miss me, Ethan. You miss the version of me that worshipped you. But she's gone. His hands clenched at his sides. So that's it? Yes, I whispered. That's it. He looked at me, really looked at me, as if realizing for the first time that I was truly gone. And then, without another word, he turned and walked away. As I watched him disappear down the driveway, a strange sense of closure settled over me. I had spent so much of my life waiting for Ethan Carter to love me the way I had loved him. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I was finally free. James found me later that night, sitting in the garden, staring up at the sky. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside me, his presence steady and unwavering. You did the right thing, he finally said. I nodded. I know. He tilted his head, studying me. But... I let out a soft sigh. But it still hurts. Not because I want him back, but because I wasted so much of myself on him. James reached for my hand, his grip warm and reassuring. That wasn't wasted, Sophia. It was a lesson. And now, you get to decide what comes next. I turned to him, our eyes meeting in the dim glow of the garden lights. And for the first time in a long while, I believed him. Because for the first time, I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward. The days following Ethan's visit felt like a breath of fresh air. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by the ghost of my past. I wasn't waiting for love that would never come, and I wasn't yearning for an apology that wouldn't change a thing. I was finally choosing myself. James, true to his nature, remained by my side. He didn't push, didn't demand, but his presence alone was a comfort. I found myself confiding in him more and more, trusting him in a way I had never truly trusted anyone before. He had seen me at my worst, and yet, he never turned away. One evening, as we sat in my father's study discussing my plans, James leaned back in his chair, watching me carefully. So, what's next for you? I hesitated, staring at the papers spread across the desk. Business proposals, investment plans, things I had once ignored because I was too busy being someone's wife. But now, they represented something new. A future that belonged to me. I want to rebuild what I lost, I admitted. But this time, it will be on my terms. James nodded, his expression approving. Good. You've always had a sharp mind for business, Sophia. Your father built an empire, and you have the same fire in you. I glanced at him, a small smile forming. You really believe that? Always. His confidence in me was unwavering, and for the first time, I let myself believe in it too. The decision to take back my place in the industry was met with mixed reactions. Some saw me as nothing more than Ethan Carter's ex-wife, while others underestimated my capabilities. But I didn't let their doubts shake me. I had spent too long living in the shadows. Now, it was time to step into the light. James connected me with key figures in the business world, some of whom had been close to my father. Doors that had once been closed to me suddenly opened, and I wasted no time in proving my worth. But of course, the past had a way of creeping back in. Ethan. He wasn't ready to let go, and despite my clear rejection, he found ways to remind me of his presence. Whether it was articles subtly spinning the narrative of our failed marriage or sudden appearances at events he knew I would attend, he was always lurking in the background. One evening, I arrived at a charity gala, dressed in a sleek black gown that exuded confidence. James was by my side, his presence as steady as ever. The room was filled with high-profile figures, some of whom I had grown up around, others who had once whispered behind my back. I ignored the stares and murmurs, focusing instead on the reason I was here, to establish myself, to build something real. And then I saw him. Ethan stood near the bar, his gaze locked onto me the moment I entered. He looked different, tired, older, as if the weight of his choices had finally caught up to him. But there was something else, something desperate in his expression. James noticed too. He's not going to stop, is he? I sighed, picking up a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Probably not. Do you want me to handle it? James asked, his tone casual but firm. I smiled, appreciating his protectiveness. No. I'll handle it. As if sensing the shift, Ethan pushed away from the bar and approached. The room seemed to quiet, eyes subtly turning in our direction. He stopped in front of me, his presence still commanding despite everything. Sophia. His voice was softer than I expected. Can we talk? James took a step closer, his presence a silent warning, but I placed a hand on his arm, signaling that I had this under control. I met Ethan's gaze with unwavering confidence. There's nothing left to say. His jaw clenched. Sophia, please. Just 5 minutes. I hesitated, not because I wanted to hear him out, but because I wanted to put an end to this once and for all. Fine, I said. 5 minutes. We stepped onto the balcony, the night air cool against my skin. Ethan turned to face me, his expression unreadable. I know I messed up, he started, his voice low. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now how much I hurt you. I crossed my arms. Ethan, what do you want from me? He exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. I don't know. I can't stand the thought of you with someone else. I let out a bitter laugh. That's not love, Ethan. That's possession. And I am not something you can own. His expression darkened. It's not like that. Isn't it? I shot back. You let me go. You chose Bella. And now, when you realize what you lost, you think you can just walk back into my life? He flinched at the mention of Bella's name, guilt flashing across his face. I was blind. I shook my head. No. You were selfish. Silence stretched between us, heavy and final. I'm moving on, Ethan, I said softly. You should too. His eyes searched mine, as if looking for something, some sign that I still cared, that there was still a chance. But I gave him nothing. Finally, he nodded, though his face was filled with regret. Goodbye, Sophia. Goodbye, Ethan. As I stepped back inside, James was waiting for me. I let out a long breath, my shoulders lighter than they had been in years. Is it over? He asked. I nodded. Yes. James smiled, his hand warm as he placed it on the small of my back. Good. Now let's focus on what's ahead. I looked up at him, feeling something unfamiliar but welcome settle in my chest. A future. A real one. For the first time, I wasn't looking back. I was moving forward. The weeks that followed the gala marked a new beginning. My name, once whispered in the industry as nothing more than Ethan Carter's discarded ex-wife, was now spoken with a newfound respect. My business ventures flourished, my investments paid off, and my influence in the industry grew. More importantly, I felt free. Ethan had stopped reaching out. Whether it was resignation or exhaustion, I didn't care. I had no more words for him, and I certainly had no patience left for his regrets. My future was no longer intertwined with his, and I intended to keep it that way. But even as I moved forward, there was something, or rather, someone, who refused to let me walk alone. James Hale. One evening, as I walked into my office after a long day of meetings, I found James sitting comfortably on my couch, scrolling through his phone as if he had all the time in the world. I raised an eyebrow. Breaking into my office now? He smirked. Your assistant let me in. Apparently, I have VIP privileges. I rolled my eyes, but couldn't suppress the warmth that bloomed in my chest at the sight of him. What do you want, James? He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Dinner. I narrowed my eyes. Dinner? With me. His confidence was unwavering, but there was something deeper behind his words, something vulnerable. I had always known James cared about me, but he had never pushed. He had been patient, always letting me set the pace. And now, he was finally laying his cards on the table. I exhaled softly, setting my purse down. James, no, he interrupted gently. Don't tell me you're not ready. I know you, Sophia. You're not the same woman you were months ago. You fought to get here. But I'm not asking you to make a decision right now. I'm asking you to take a chance. A chance. I thought back to all the years I had spent chasing a love that was never meant to be mine. To all the moments I had sacrificed for someone who had never truly seen me. And then I looked at James, the man who had always been there, even when I didn't realize I needed him. A slow smile spread across my lips. Fine. Dinner. His grin was immediate. That's all I needed to hear. Dinner with James was easy. Natural. It wasn't about proving anything or pretending to be someone I wasn't. It was just us, two people who had weathered their own storms and had somehow found each other on the other side. We sat in a quiet corner of a rooftop restaurant, the city lights stretching before us like scattered diamonds. The conversation flowed effortlessly, laughter weaving through every exchange. And as the night deepened, James reached across the table, his fingers brushing against mine. Sophia, he said softly. I don't want to just be your friend. My breath hitched. I've waited a long time, he continued, his voice steady but raw with emotion. And I'll wait as long as it takes. But I need you to know, I'm not going anywhere. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Because this wasn't love built on conditions or sacrifices. This was love that stayed. And I was finally ready to embrace it. Months passed, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was living for myself. No longer defined by my past or my failed marriage, I built something real, something that belonged to me alone. My business thrived, my name stood independent of Ethan Carter's shadow, and most importantly, I was happy. And James? He remained by my side, steady as always. One evening, we stood on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights flicker like stars below us. James leaned against the railing, his hands tucked into his pockets, his usual air of confidence softened by something more vulnerable. You're leaving for New York tomorrow, he said. I nodded. Just for a few weeks. Expansion meetings. He smirked. You're becoming a powerhouse, Sophia. I laughed, shaking my head. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just finally stepping into who I was always meant to be. His expression grew serious, and he turned fully toward me. I'm proud of you, you know. Something warm settled in my chest. Thank you, James. For everything. His eyes held mine, a silent question lingering there. Sophia, I reached for his hand, intertwining our fingers. "I know," I whispered. "I know." James exhaled, a slow, relieved breath, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes I had never noticed before, not just love, but certainty. The night before I left for New York, James came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. We sat on the floor of my living room, laughing, talking, enjoying the moment. There was no rush, no pressure, just us, as we had always been, but now with the promise of something more. As the night stretched on, I found myself watching him, memorizing the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the warmth in his gaze when he looked at me. I had spent so long chasing love that I had never noticed when it had been standing beside me all along. "James," I murmured. He turned, his eyes searching mine. "Yeah?" I hesitated for only a second before saying the words I had been holding on to for so long. "I love you." His breath hitched, and for a moment, all the walls, all the past regrets, melted away. Then he smiled, a real, breathtaking smile, and pulled me into his arms. "I love you too, Sophia," he whispered against my hair. "I always have." And just like that, everything fell into place. 6 months later, James and I stood on a private beach, the waves crashing softly behind us. My parents, my closest friends, and a handful of people who had supported me through my journey were gathered around as we exchanged vows, not promises built on desperation or obligation, but on love, trust, and mutual respect. James took my hands in his voice steady and full of warmth. "Sophia, you are the strongest, most incredible person I have ever known. You walked through fire and emerged stronger. Loving you is the greatest honor of my life." Tears welled in my eyes as I smiled. "James, you showed me that love doesn't have to hurt. That it can be steady, kind, and unwavering. I choose you today, tomorrow, and always." With those words, we sealed our fate, not with fear, but with hope. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I looked at the man beside me, the one who had been there all along, and knew without a doubt, this was the life I had fought for. And this time, I had one.